Glianiv Sunday.
Where exactly could you clarify?
The occupation began, the Ukrainian Armed Forces are opening the gates of freedom for Crimea. Missiles are flying, Russian air defense is out, explosions, fires, panic, the occupiers are packing their bags. The Kremlin is losing the peninsula, the empire is cracking. The energy front is open, Ukrainian drones are striking oil refineries and power plants in the heart of Russia. Winter is ahead, and even Moscow will be left without light and heat. All the details in just a moment. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and we're getting started. A night storm over Crimea. The Ukrainian Armed Forces put on a fiery show for the occupiers. The peninsula is trembling, with occupation already at its doorstep. The first good birds appeared in the sky around 1 in the morning. Flashes lit up the night in Vardiska for the second time. Russian air defenses pounded the sky as if it were their last. And within 15 minutes, 2 missiles over Feodosia. The flight of these missiles or fighter jets was probably heard in the Simferopol region a little later. Damn.
Not visible. Just a second, please.
Act is fiery. Around 3 in the morning, reports came from Vardiska about 4 direct hits. Columns of smoke rose above the settlement. Strikes hit either the airfield or the oil depot. The fire can be seen for kilometers. In Simferopol, the HRE's district is on fire, and later photos and videos of the fire at the oil depot appeared, as well as at the oil distribution facility in Bytomny. At 6:01, a powerful explosion thundered over Crimea, which was heard from Simferopol to the southern coast of Crimea. By the way, the Russian Ministry of Lies claims that supposedly 7 drones were shot down over Crimea during the night. We know about 2 of them. One was shot down near the oil depot in Simferopol, the other with something flammable in Vardiska. So where are the other 5? Crimea is on the verge of liberation. Step by step, the armed forces of Ukraine are making the peninsula uninhabitable for the occupiers. Russian settlers are no longer interested in the beaches. The fun is gone. Even fuel is disappearing somewhere. And the enemy's military radars are turning into scrap metal one after another. Ukrainian strikes are precise, systematic, and are bringing the key moment of Crimea's return to Ukraine ever closer. To
the native harbor.
And that harbor is Ukraine. Crimea is being cut off from the Russian Federation, and the collapse of the Crimean bridge is just a matter of time, according to Western publications. There is already a total fuel crisis on the peninsula, some areas have been left without electricity, there isn't enough air defense even for the most critical sites, and the remaining crews in the chaos are now shooting down their own aircraft.
We note that Crimea, as a military base, is becoming more and more inconvenient for Russia, and also because there's no water.
Yes, the last few days have marked a new reality of life on the peninsula. The key event was a series of strikes in the Vardiiske area, where, after precise hits, the largest oil depot in the region caught fire. According to locals, the burning depot in Vardiska could be seen even from the outskirts of Simferopol, with the glow visible for many kilometers. In
Vardiska, there was a strike not only on the oil depot, but also on the military airfield, and also on the Russian garrison stationed there. According to
information circulating online, an ammunition depot on the garrison's territory was also hit. In addition, the oil depot near Feodosia has also partially ceased operations. As a result of several attacks just this month, 11 fuel tanks were completely destroyed, as confirmed by satellite images.
The important thing about the Feodosia oil depot is that it didn't just burn down on its own, it burned down along with the fuel that was stored in those tanks. And that's going to be very hard to deny. It's not clear what was stored there, diesel or gasoline, but if it was gasoline, which is likely at least in part, that means there will be significantly more smoke in occupied Crimea this week than there was the week before. So we wait and see.
At the same time, each such strike is notable for the fact that it's practically impossible to extinguish the fire, experts say. The burning fuel spreads across the facility, igniting neighboring tanks, and so the fire can continue for days.
The landscapes of Feodosia adorn almost the entire eastern part of Crimea. They say the flames can be seen from 30, and in some places even 50 kilometers away. It seems like everything is burning down. The facility needs to be shut down. This is the recommendation for the occupying Crimean authorities, who have also confirmed there will be no gasoline. No.
There will be no diesel either, adds the local authorities. Yes, since the beginning of the week, diesel fuel has also disappeared in Crimea, local activists report. Given this state of affairs, the promises of the head of the occupying Crimean administration, Sergei Aksyonov, to stabilize the fuel supply situation have simply not been fulfilled, added pro-Russian propagandist Alexander Sergeyev. At the same time, the authorities are desperately trying to conceal the real situation of what is happening in Crimea. Just over the past weekend alone, employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs drew up at least 4 administrative reports against residents of the peninsula for posts on social media. People in particular were outraged by the lack of fuel. Notably, the Russians themselves are in part helping the Ukrainian Armed Forces to identify targets in Crimea. Experts have analyzed that you can currently find them simply by opening maps on the internet.
Do you remember when Yandex Maps started blurring all sorts of strategic sites? I said that now it's absolutely clear where exactly to strike. So, my friends from Inform Napalm noticed that the Special Operations Forces did exactly that. The territory of the oil depot in Vardiska was blurred on Yandex, but for some reason, that didn't help against the strikes. Mysterious? Once again, thanks to all the Russian decisions that help increase the effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes. Blurring military sites on Yandex Maps is definitely one of them.
Another decision that contributes to the regular strikes in Crimea has been the work of the defense forces targeting Russian air defense sites on the peninsula. For example, the day before, the main intelligence directorate managed to hit the occupiers' latest radar system. We're talking about the Valde complex, which was developed to detect small-sized drones.
The security service of Ukraine continues to systematically reduce the military, logistical, and economic capabilities of the enemy to do anything both in occupied Crimea, in other occupied territories, and even on Russian territory itself. But Crimea suffers the most because their air defense system was deliberately destroyed. In Crimea, their ability to defend themselves was reduced, and now we are working as if inside the body.
By the way, so that the occupiers in Crimea don't get the illusion that everything will go back to normal along with the oil depots and the military equipment, the Ukrainian Armed Forces haven't forgotten about the equipment that supplies electricity to Russian bases. In several regions of the peninsula, Ukrainian defenders have organized blackouts.
At night in Crimea, several electrical substations were put out of commission. In particular, the main electrical substation in Jankoy, or Jankongi, as we used to call it in Crimea. So now power outage schedules are being introduced, and Putin is being shown, quite specifically and yet again, that if he continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the occupiers in Crimea will be left without electricity and fuel. Well,
And the cherry on top. During one of the latest attacks, the Russian air defense crews got so nervous that they started firing at everything in sight. As a result, one Russian fighter jet worth about $50 million was lost.
during a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, Russian forces shot down their own Su-30 SM aircraft. This happened right in the area of the Vardiske airfield.
At the same time, there is no positive outlook for the occupiers when it comes to air defense. Analysts note that recently there have been more strikes on Russian territory, prompting the decision to partially redeploy air defense systems from Crimea back to Russia for protection.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Last night, the good drones also ventured deep into Russia. Volgograd is on fire. A massive fire broke out at the Lukoil Volgograd oil refinery. The night sky was painted in apocalyptic colors. The Kostroma GRES came under attack by the armed forces of Ukraine. They hit one of the largest power plants in Russia with reports of explosions and fires. For a moment, the facility that powers half of the central region of the Russian Federation is paralyzed. Now, Russia's defense factories are left without electricity.
Look, there's a third one appearing. That's it. By the way, where is the grocery section? Probably yes. At first they hit one pipe, which is now closed. Then, where are all the pipes anyway? In fact, it should be there.
Russia is plunging into darkness. The Ukrainian armed forces have opened an energy front. Thermal power plants, oil depots, infrastructure, everything is being thrown into fiery chaos. The strikes are becoming deeper, more powerful, and more precise. If the Kremlin doesn't come to its senses, winter will become a frozen nightmare for Russians.
Military facilities, the energy sector, and the oil industry. The war has finally moved onto Russian territory, and the Ukrainian armed forces seem to have chosen their targets in the occupiers' rear and are ramping up long-range strikes.
One of the main goals is to force Russia to end the war, to make the cost of this war higher for Russia so that there are more mobilizations to bring it to an end.
At the same time, the defense forces give Russians more motivation every day. Over the past few weeks, not a single night has passed in Russia without something exploding, catching fire, or being destroyed. We have gathered the most high-profile incidents. Undoubtedly, the most striking event regarding Russian blackouts was the Ukrainian Armed Forces attack on the Moscow region on the night of November 1st. Monitoring channels reported hundreds of drones that took off to bomb Russia. And they were right. Although Moscow's energy system held up, entire settlements around the capital were left without power. In particular, the Moscow suburbs and the city of Zhukovsky were left without electricity. S as in Sierra, U as in uniform.
Have already carried out numerous strikes on stations and substations, and electricity and heating are periodically cut off in many cities of Russia and in the occupied territories. Let me remind you, Ukraine is conducting a campaign against Russian energy infrastructure in response to Russian terror targeting Ukraine's power-generating facilities. I think that in December, this retaliatory campaign will reach a new level with the use of Flamingo missiles almost in real-time mode.
The campaign to destroy Russia's oil industry is also continuing. In particular, the recent strikes on the oil terminal in Tuapse, Russia, were especially effective.
The attack on the Tuapse seaport was quite large-scale, effective, and also spectacular. Local residents began taking photos and recording videos of the attack, and the beginning of the attack was also captured on video. Meanwhile, the local emergency services issued the usual statement: please do not film the aftermath of the strikes, as it helps the enemy.
However, what helps the Ukrainian armed forces is not at all the videos made by concerned Russians who, in the fourth year, have suddenly discovered that the war is now right outside their windows. It's intelligence data, including from the West, that makes it possible to carry out such precise strikes.
The impact of the Ukrainian UAV, according to the Russian side's own assessment, hit accordingly such targets as the central overpass is actually the main oil pumping hub in this area. Accordingly, we are specifically talking about a strike on an oil tanker, which at the very moment of the attack was in the process of being loaded.
At the same time, when they succeed, the Ukrainian armed forces manage to kill several birds with one stone with a single strike. That is, to destroy facilities that, on the one hand, are very important for the Russian economy, and on the other hand, are clearly military targets.
The strike was carried out on an industrial giant of the Simferopol region, the Stavrolan petrochemical plant in the city of Budyonovsk. This is one of the largest producers of polyethylene, polypropylene, benzene, and other petrochemical components which are actively used in the military-industrial complex.
Analysts note that this was the first time a strike was carried out there. By the way, the plant is located 700 kilometers from Ukraine. And this enterprise supplies raw materials both to the domestic market and for export. Therefore, this strike damages not only the military-industrial complex, but also the export revenues of the Russian budget. The defense forces are also targeting Russian facilities in the occupied territories. A few days ago, the residents of Crimea especially felt this after one of the largest attacks on the peninsula in recent months. In particular, the attacks targeted oil depots in Feodosia and Sevastopol.
The outcome of this episode is as follows. In just 1 hour, 2 major oil facilities in Crimea were put out of commission. This means a complete loss of stability for the occupiers' rear enterprises in this sector, especially against the backdrop of the disruption and shutdown of the largest oil terminal in Feodosia, and the general gasoline shortage in Russia itself, which I would like to remind you is the only source for replenishing Crimea's oil depots.
Most recently, on the night of November 4th, drones and Storm Shadow missiles from the defense forces managed to inflict damage not only on Russian energy infrastructure and oil depots, but also significantly complicated their presence in the occupied territories, effectively disabling all military facilities within the strike zone.
Ukrainian drones struck substations in Luhansk, Alchevsk, Kadivka, and Pervomaisk. These are towns in the occupied territory of Luhansk region. There are reports of widespread power outages for consumers. On the territory of the Russian Federation, over the past day, Ukrainian Defense Forces drones struck in Kursk region, specifically Zhelezhnogorsk, targeting a substation, leaving the city completely without power. In Lipetsk region, the target was the PSO's traction substation, Usman, and accordingly, the city of Orel. The strike was carried out according to the Orel text. That's what concerns the blackout.
As for military targets, analysts call the explosions at the dam near Belgorod one of the most successful long-range attacks by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The strike was so precise that no civilians were harmed. But Russian units in the Kharkiv region found themselves cut off from their own forces due to the flooding, and the offensive failed.
An important objective is to strike at Russia's logistical capabilities, ammunition depots, airfields, aircraft, and troop concentrations, in order to create difficulties for Moscow's war machine. To strike at the centers from which Russia directs operations on the front and from which it can attack Ukraine's strategic infrastructure.
At the same time, it's far too early for the Russians to relax, as announced by the head of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Madhyar. This winter, residents of the Russian Federation will find out what a blackout is. Then at the same time, he reminded that gas and oil burn very well, clearly hinting at new attacks on oil refineries.
As of November, according to estimates from the Russian side itself, about 40% of oil refining facilities in the Russian Federation have already been put out of operation.
Well, as they say, to be continued soon.
And what do you think about the work of Ukrainian Ironbirds ORF? We look forward to your comments. More to come, stay tuned for the main news, and don't forget about the foot bikes. Peaceful skies above your head.